Okay, so last time we started off talking about section 3.5, which is slope-intercept form. In other words, y equals mx plus b. So we went through graphing examples and things like that, um, identifying the slope and the y-intercept, okay, using a table, okay, to find the slope-intercept, again, which is y equals mx plus b. And then we talked about this particular problem, find the slope-intercept form of the line satisfying the given conditions. So you have an equation and we want it to be parallel to that equation. And but it has to go through this particular point. Okay. So we went through that process. We did this example as well as this example. Okay. Um, so our next part is um, we want to find, so same question, okay, find the slope-intercept form, but in this case, um, it has to be perpendicular, okay? So let me pause this here. All right, so the previous one, as I mentioned, talked about finding equation that's parallel to the given line. This one is finding an equation that's perpendicular, right? So it's find the slope form perpendicular to y is equal to 3, 4x minus 1 half. But it has to go through the point 3, negative 2. So, parallel looks like that, right? Two lines that are parallel. Perpendicular means what? Does anybody remember what that means? What kind of angle does a perpendicular lines have to make? 90, good, right? So it has to be 90 degrees, right? So basically we have a line this direction and the other line going this direction, and they form 90 degrees. So that's what perpendicular means, okay? Now before we tackle this problem, let's look at this one. It says find the negative reciprocal, okay? So what does that mean, negative reciprocal? So for example, if I had negative fourth or negative 4, what's going to be the negative reciprocal of that? How about if I said, let's just do, say, 5. What's going to be the negative reciprocal of 5? Not negative 5, negative 1/5, right? So it's reciprocal of 5 would be 1/5, and then you have the negative. Okay? Here, it's already negative. So that means the reciprocal will be what? 1/4, right? And then one has to be positive, one is negative. So if it's negative 4, the opposite of that is going to be 1/4 and then a positive. Okay. So negative 4, the negative reciprocal of it will be 1/4. Okay. How about say if we had 7/5? What's the negative reciprocal of that? Good, right? So it again has to be flipped. 5, 7. One is positive and the other one has to be negative. Okay. So this would be the negative reciprocal. Now, um, for something to be perpendicular, or two lines to be perpendicular, the slopes of those equations have to have a product of -1. So what does that mean? So if I have -4 and we said that the negative reciprocal of that was 1/4, so when I multiply this 2, what does that produce? What's -4 times 1/4? Good, right? That'd be -1. Same thing for the other one, right? If I have 5 and I multiply it by -1/5, what does that give me? It's, no, remember, it has to be a product of a -1, right? It can't be a positive. Remember, if one is positive and the other one is negative, the product of that will always be negative, right? Positive times a negative is a negative, and then a negative times a positive is always a negative. Okay? All right, and then if I have 7/5 and then multiply it by -5/7, and that also gives me -1, right? So for, again, two slopes to be perpendicular to each other, that means the angle forms 90 degrees. Well, the product of those two slopes have to produce -1 in order to be perpendicular to each other. Okay? So let's go back to here, right? So I want to find an equation in slope-intercept form that's perpendicular to this one here. All right. So what is the most important part we need to get from this equation? What's the most important part? The slope, exactly. So what's the slope here? Remember, the slope doesn't have an x. The slope doesn't have an x. Okay? Slope is only a number. So let's write that down. Note, okay, a slope is just a number. Okay? No x. All right? So in this case, what's the slope? 3/4. Good. Okay? So that's our slope, 3/4. Okay? So now what? We want it to be perpendicular. So what does that mean again? That means it has to form a right angle, right? So if our original slope is 3/4, what's going to be the perpendicular slope? What does that have to be? Remember, it has to be reciprocal. One has to be the opposite of the other, correct? So if this is 3/4, the opposite of that would be 4/3, right? And if this is positive, then the other one has to be negative. Okay? All right. So to double check, we just multiply these together. So 3/4 times -4/3, what does that give us? Exactly, -1, right? And that's what we want. We want the product of those two slopes to equal -1. Okay? All right. So now we know that the perpendicular slope has to be -4/3. Okay? All right. So now let's use that information to solve figure this out. So we're going to start with y is equal to mx plus b, correct? We already know our slope. Okay? We already know our slope. So what's going to be our x and our y? What's that going to be? What's our x and y? Good. It's going to be 3, -2, right? What's given to us? Right here. That's our x and y, right? So this is our x value and that's our y value. Okay? So we just plug it in. So y is -2, and we know it's perpendicular, so we have to use a perpendicular slope. So which is -4/3. Okay, and then x we know is 3, and then plus b. Okay, all right. Well, I can rewrite 3 as 3 over 1, and then these guys will just cancel. Okay, so that gives me -4 plus b equals -2. And then we just solve for b. So we're going to add 4 to both sides. And we get 2 is equal to b. Okay, so when we do this, we want we want to identify two things, or we want to figure out two items. One is the slope, which we talked about, and the other one is the b, or the y-intercept. Okay, and we got those. Well, here's our slope, here's our y-intercept, okay, or our b. So when we put it together, we have y is equal to -4/3 x plus 2, okay? And that will be the slope, and well, in the equation in slope-intercept form, perpendicular to y equals 3/4 x minus 2, minus 1/2. Okay, so let's look what this would look like. So if we were to graph y equals 3/4 x minus 1/2, it would look like this red line here. Now we just found the new equation, which is going to be perpendicular to the red line. So again, that means it has to form a 90-degree angle. So if I graph that, this is what we get. Okay, so it makes this, the red line is perpendicular to the blue line, and all the angles in this case are 90-degree angles. Okay, so why don't you guys try one? All right, let's try this one. So let's say you have, again, we want this equation here to be perpendicular to this one. This is 6x minus 3y equals 18. Okay, we have 6x minus 3y equals 18. What do we need to do first? What do we need to do first before we can find the slope-intercept form? What do we need to do first? Yep, we need to find y, right? We need to solve for y first. We need to solve for y first. So if this is written in standard form, we wanted to write it in slope-intercept form. So we need to solve for y first. Okay, so that'll be minus 6x, minus 6x, minus 3y, minus 6x plus 18. And then we divide by -3. Okay, so it's important that we have to write it in slope-intercept form first. Okay, all right, so now we know what it is, okay? When we solve it for y, that's what we want first in order to do this, okay? So now go ahead and see if you can find the line that's perpendicular to this, and it goes to the point of 4, -3, okay? 4, -3, okay? So again, if you saw this, if we had it this form, we have to write it, we have to solve for y first, and then we can plug in the point they want us to find the perpendicular line. Okay, so go ahead and do that, and then once you're done, go ahead and post your answer. All right, so remember, if it's in this form, this is called standard form. AX plus BY equals C. That's standard form. Okay, AX plus by equals c. That's in standard form. Okay. And then this is here is in slope-intercept form. Intercept. Okay. So this is standard form. And then this is slope-intercept form. Okay. All right. So we need to um, convert it to the slope-intercept form in order to find the perpendicular line. Okay. So in this case, our slope here, right? Remember, slope is just a number. Our slope here is 2. So that means then the perpendicular slope is going to be negative 1/2, as people have noted on the chat. No x, right? No variable. It's just a number. Okay? So now, I mean, you can put a this little symbol means perpendicular, right? We talked about that, the upside down T. Okay? So the perpendicular one, so if you want to distinguish it from the original to the perpendicular, you can put that upside down T there. Okay? So now we have negative 1/2 x plus b. Okay? And then now we just plug in the information that they gave us for our x and y, which was 4, -3. So we had 4, -3. So here's our x and here's our y. So I'm going to put -3 in there. X is 4 and then plus b. Okay. Half of 4 we know is 2 and we have a negative there. So this would be -2. Okay. And they still have a -3 out there in the front and then plus b. Right? Our goal is to solve for b. Okay. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. And that gives us a -1 for b. What's b again? The y-intercept. All right, so now we put it all together. Okay, so when we put it together, all we care about is the m and the b. So we have y is equal to perpendicular, which is -1/2, x, and then our y-intercept is -1. Okay, so before we tackle this problem, we need to understand the slope-intercept form. What does it mean? If we don't understand that, then we're not going to understand how to do this problem, right? So we have y is equal to mx plus b. Okay? So what does m mean again? What does m mean again? It is the slope. Yes, that's the slope. How do you describe slope? Rise over run, yes. What's another way? Remember we talked about the gym example? Remember that? How much you would pay per month, right? So that is what? The average rate. How much you're paying or how much is happening every single time. That's okay. The average rate of change. Well, what about the B? What does that mean? What is the B? It's the y-intercept, that's true. And it's y-intercept, that's true, but what does that mean? What does the y-intercept mean? What is the y? This is y. Let's go back to the Gold's Gym, right? Said the person was paying $50 a month. Did they have any startup fee, startup costs? They did, didn't they? It was $100. Remember that? They had to pay $100 initially. And that's every gym. You had to pay every you had to pay, right? So y the b is also the y-intercept, but also the starting point. Okay. We also talked about the lawnmower. Right? You spent this much $200 on a lawnmower. Okay. So you're down the whole $200 already. So that means how many lawns you have to mow in order to um, um, have equilibrium. Basically, um, that how many lawns you mowed has paid for the cost of the mower. Okay? Again, if you don't understand this, then this here is just going to be blah. Not going to make any sense at all. You have to understand what the letters mean. Okay? So now let's go to here. All right? I'm going to give you another minute or so to figure it out. Okay? The total rainfall, Y in inches, that fell X hours past noon is given by this. So before we even look at the questions, what does the 3 indicate? What does that mean? What does the 3 indicate? Yeah, this is in inches. Yes, it's true. This is in inches. But what does the 3 indicate? Exactly. How much rain has fallen at noon? Okay. And what does the 1/2 mean? The rate, right? The rate that how much rain is happening. Okay. So now we understand what those numbers mean, right? 3 means how much has rained. So how much has it already rained by noon? Okay. And then this is the rate that the rain is coming. Okay. So 1/2 inches per hour. Okay. So A then, how much rainfall was there at noon? By noon, how much rain was there already? 3, exactly. This is 3, 3 inches. Okay. What rate was the rain falling in the afternoon? What was the rate? 1/2, right? 1/2. All right. So now it's basically asking the same questions that we already answered. What is the y-intercept? Well, what is the y-intercept? What's the y-intercept here? 3, exactly, right? That's the y-intercept. What does that represent? We just said it. That's how much rain by noon. Okay. All right. What does the slope? What's the slope here? What's the slope? Exactly, 1/2. What does it mean? The rate that the rain is falling, right? The rate that the rain is falling. Oops. Okay. Okay. Any questions here?